Shall we do this?
Yep, we're all set.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Yes, yes. I see some smiling faces.
I can hear you. This is Dan Pilson.
Okay, so we're actually going through 4 disclosure forms. I'm just picking on those today because they're probably the most important that are in our Zipforms booklet. I know it's difficult to get comments, but raise your hand if you have your video on, or use the chat at the bottom of the screen if you have questions as I go through this. Otherwise, it's just going to kind of be a lecture format. So I'm hoping everybody knows that on our TRG website, if you log in under the agent login, the password, you should all you guys know the password. I guess I can give it out. It's SOLD. You'll be able to download our booklet that has all of the forms that are typically needed. Danny's showing you here in this agent login on our website, all the different forms that you can download. And most of these are covered in our Thursday Lunch and Learns and our workshops. But today we're just going to pick out a few of the forms from this complete Zipforms booklet. We update these every year. In fact, they were updated in March. And we actually have a new TDS as of June of this year. And we're going to go through that this afternoon. Okay, in fact, let's start. If there aren't any questions or anything, we're just going to dive into this. And let's start with the real estate transfer disclosures. We call that the TDS. This is a state mandated form that has to be in all files, on all closed residential real estate files. It's a 3-page form, and we've got the new form, the June 2020 version that Danny's going to pull up here in a moment, and we can go through it. I first looked at this morning, and frankly, I can't see the changes, so I haven't looked on the website to see what CAR says the changes are from the previous form, but I can't see where the changes are in this. So the form that we actually have on the booklet that's online is fine, even though it's an older revision, and the new revision just came out. And as you'll see here, that this form is, along with all of the forms in our booklet, I've filled them out as I would like to see them in your closed file. So you're not just getting a blank sample form here. This is what I would like to see. And it's obviously more important in the purchase agreements and the counteroffers. But I went ahead and I filled out these disclosure forms also, so that you can see what's typical in a residential transaction. Okay, so as I mentioned, the TDS is a required form. The state only has about, I think there's maybe 5 or 6 required forms. TDS is one, purchase agreement. Your agency disclosures are required. But most of the disclosures that not only TRG but other brokers use are not state mandated forms. For example, the AVID, which is what we're going to go over today, the agent's visual inspection disclosure, is not a state required form, but I can't imagine doing a transaction without that, and it is a required form for TRG. So let's go through this. On the front page, when you pull this form up in Zipforms, the agent is only able to print the typed areas that are in here. Everything else has to be done by the seller. And that's why you'll see the handwritten notes here. So this is typical of a TDS. They're going to check which items are included in the property. In this case, there's a range and an oven and a dishwasher. One of the issues that comes up is under the garage, the number of remote controls. So the seller is disclosing that there's only one remote control. And then more importantly, down below, that last, I'll mention on the roof type. Typically, most roofs are a composition shingle, and so versus a tile, or it might be a flat roof. And so that's how I would write that. And if the seller is not sure of the age, then they should put older. If they know that it's 5 years old or 10 years old, then write that in. But if it's older, that covers the seller in saying that, hey, we don't know what the useful life is of this roof. Most importantly is that last sentence on that first page. It says, hey, seller, to the best of your ability, anything that's not in working order. And as you'll discover, in most cases, your seller will say, no, everything's fine. Obviously, if there is something not working, this is where they should mention that in those lines. The next page, are you aware of any significant defects or malfunctions in any of the following? And again, I would say at least 9 out of 10 of my clients always say no, just like the rest of these questions down below here. Everything is fine. So what they're asking, though, is that if the seller is aware of any significant defects. So that's subjective. It's a subjective question. For example, if there's cracks on the sidewalk or cracks on the house or minor problems, the seller may not consider it to be significant. So this is what the seller fills out. And then down below under item C here, it also has all of these questions. And these were the only questions that are asked of a seller about their property. And when you go through this, for the agents that have been around when this was the only disclosure that was required, it's very limiting relative to the seller property questionnaire, the SPQ, which is what we're going to review today also. And the SPQ is not a mandated form. So this is the only mandated form, but there are important questions here. Hey, are you aware of any environmental hazards? Are you aware of any additions that were done without permits? Are you aware of any neighborhood noise problems or any lawsuits, right? And again, vast majority of the time, sellers are going to say, nope, everything is fine. And so this is not for you to question that. This is for the seller to fill out and disclose to the buyer. And then on the last page is where the agent, page 3, is where the agent makes their disclosure. And we used to make disclosures here. Now we always check that first box and we say, see the AVID form. So this is a mandatory that the agents make this disclosure and that we complete this form. This is mandatory in all residential sales. So even if you have a probate, or it could be a foreclosure, it could be other properties where a trustee may be, a successor trustee may be exempt from filling out the AVID, the agents are still required to fill this out and make this disclosure. So basically that's it on the TDS form. I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to go into the AVID, which obviously is more important in my eyes, because this is what the seller is, this is what the agent is going to state about the property. And over the years, I've been to many different seminars where we've had attorneys and specialists in this AVID form. And just to kind of give you an overview, typically if a problem comes up because an agent didn't do his diligent inspection of the property, it's usually going to come up a couple of years after the close. If a problem arises after the close of escrow, and everybody gets attorneys and there's lawsuits involved. After a mediation, or to get a mediation, we're talking months and months after the close of escrow. So the way it was presented to me is that it's important that when you make these disclosures about the property, is that you walk through the property and make notations that will remind you a year or 2 years later about this property. And obviously for an agent that does a lot of transactions, you're not going to remember much about this property. So it's very important that you make a notation about the front yard, about the front of the house, front of the property. You make a notation about being inside the property, and you make notations about something in the backyard, so that you can come back to this and show that you made your diligent inspection by going through this property. Agents are, we don't have to look in the attic, we don't have to look under the house, we don't have to lift anything up to do any inspections other than just what's available in a walkthrough. So what's important though is that you note all of these different places. And so I'm going to go through this as to what I would like to see in your AVID. And if you notice, it says in bold type there, it states that the undersigned, based on a reasonable, competent, and diligent visual inspection of normally accessible areas, states the following. So it's our duty to state comments on the condition of this property. We don't make comments and say, oh, this bedroom looks good, or there's nothing to disclose, or everything is fine. And I see that, especially working with other agents and other companies. I'd say on half of the paperwork that I see on these AVIDs, the agents are saying, oh, there's nothing to report, nothing to report. That's not our duty. Our duty is only to state what is wrong with the property, or something that we see that is visually worn, or needs replacement, or needs the attention of the buyer. So if there's nothing in that room, then you just leave that blank. Or as I'll mention here, it's very difficult to fill these out when you have a new property or one that's just been remodeled. One of our agents a few months ago, she had me go over to the property. She said, I can't see anything on this house because it was all freshly painted. It had been remodeled, I think about 2 years previous, and just everything was immaculate in this house. And so on those properties, it's very difficult. But what we did is we found a little mark on one of the walls in the living room, and so you identify that there's a 1-inch black mark on the living room wall. There was a piece of trim that was loose on a kitchen cabinet. So you got to be very specific on those properties. And the same for if the property is a real fixer or a tear down, right? You don't have to do addendums and write 12 paragraphs on everything that's wrong with the house. You can just state that, hey, there's a lot of deferred maintenance, and then make comments on what's wrong. There's peeling paint, there's holes in the walls, windows are broken, roof leaks. Make comments like that. But typically on a house, most of the homes that we're going to see, it's going to be something like this, where you're going to go through the living room, you're going to say that the carpet shows some wear or is worn, and if there's marks on the wall. If the kitchen has tiles, there's usually a cracked tile. You can make a comment on that. Another comment I like to make is if there's corrosion around the faucets, whether it's in the bathroom or the kitchen. That's pretty typical for most houses, but it shows that you've actually gone through the property and you've looked at these different issues. Same for the bedrooms. And a lot of these houses 800 square feet, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, so there's not much to see in there. But if it needs painting, you can just say that the paint shows where, and you try not to be very specific. You don't say that, oh, there's a that half of the carpet needs to be replaced, or if we're talking about marks on the walls, you don't say that there's 4 marks or there's 3 marks over here. Just be very general as to what you are viewing during this walkthrough. The other thing they point out, the attorneys like to point out, is that if there's a stain on the ceiling, you don't say that, oh, there's a roof leak or that there's a water stain, because you don't know what that stain is. So you just say that in the center of the living room, there's a stain on the ceiling. So you're just being very general in this, because that's not our job. We are not specialists as to what is causing that stain. The same thing goes for mold or mildew. If you see some black stuff in the wall in the corner of the bedroom, then that's exactly what you state. There's black stuff on the wall in the corner of bedroom number 2. You don't say that it's mold. You don't say that it's mildew. In fact, personally, I don't even know what the difference is of mold and mildew, and we don't want to know that difference, because that is not our job. So anything that looks out of the ordinary, that's what you make these comments on here. I like to, typically the showers, there's some corrosion on the shower door or on the faucets, so you can make notes on that. Cracked tiles on the floor. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm looking for in this AVID. Next page there, Annie. Cracks. That's another way to show that you've been through this property and have done your diligent walkthrough. Most houses, you'll see that there's either cracks in the sidewalk out front or on the driveway. So again, there's cracks. It's not like there's 2 cracks or there's 3 cracks or the cracks are a ½ inch wide. Just be very general and state that there's cracks. If the stucco is falling off a wall, stucco needs repairs. Don't say that it's just in one spot, because we don't have to go around and check all of the stucco on the house. Rear fence leaning, we'll see that a lot, where the fence, you could say that it's leaning, or the fence on the side of the house, on the north side of the house, needs repairs. So the idea is now you can come back to this a few years later and say, oh yeah, I was outside in the front yard and noticed this about the cracks in the sidewalk. I noted this about the interior of the house and this about the exterior. So that proves that you've done your walkthrough and you're good to go. That's what I'm looking for in this AVID. Questions? All right. Let's go on to the statewide buyer and seller advisory, and then we will close on the seller property questionnaire. Okay, so this came out maybe 10, 12 years ago, and I think it was 10 pages, and we're up to 18 pages now. This was revised as of 2018. Unfortunately, I think this was about a year or 2 ago, we used to have the client sign or initial every page. And so Danny has been mentioning that there's been some talk that they want to put that back into these forms, but right now you only, 14 pages, you only have to sign on page 14. So buyers and sellers sign on, and agents all sign on the last page. And that's the only page that we have to include in our file. I'm going to let you kind of go through these on your own rather than me hitting on all of these, but I do want to kind of give you an idea as to, let's go to page, I think it's 53, I'm sorry, on 53, and give you an idea as to how these items get projected onto this statewide advisory. So if you look under number 7 and number 8, Megan's Law, so this has probably been around for, I would guess, 20 years when that first law came out. And under Megan's Law, this was before we had the websites, they had an 800 number. And so the state legislature said, okay, we've got to disclose this. And we had a separate page that all the clients would sign, stating that they're aware of this database, and you call this 800 number and you put in the zip code, and it will give you the information on registered sex offenders that are in that zip code. Now, fortunately, this has evolved to where it's all done on the computer now, and you can get some pretty detailed information as to the sex offenders in the different areas. But more importantly is that the way that these laws are written is that the state mandates this disclosure. CAR puts out a separate form for this Megan's Law database disclosure, and then when this statewide advisory gets revised, they reduce it to a paragraph. So out of this 14 pages now, this Megan's database disclosure is 1 paragraph. And the same thing applies to number 8 down here, this supplemental notice for your property taxes. If you have had clients purchase properties and they get 2 supplemental tax bills a year after they've moved in, typically you're going to get a phone call. It's like, you know, hey, the assessor's office doesn't know what they're doing. They sent me 2 bills, right? And I do a separate workshop just on property taxes, and we delve into that. But because of clients not being educated about property taxes, the state legislature did the same thing, said, oh, hey, California realtors have to give this disclosure that there's a supplemental tax bill that you're going to receive after the purchase and close of your property. And that was a 1-page disclosure. All parties had to sign. And again, the next time we did a revision, this was probably about 12 years ago, we reduced that. The CAR attorneys reduced that to 2 paragraphs here in this statewide advisory. So these are important items that are in these 14 pages that your client and hopefully all of the real estate agents will read. So go through this. If there's any specific questions on any of these items, then see me, and I'll be glad. Call me, text me, email, and I'll be glad to go over the specific concerns. The reality is that most sellers, at least the clients that I have, when I sit down and I have them fill out the TDS and I have them go through all of this, it takes about 10 or 15 minutes to go through and check all these boxes and say, no problems. And it goes very fast. It takes much less time than it does in actually reviewing these documents with the agents. But you should know what's in this statewide, even though it is 14 pages. Read through it and let me know if you have any questions. Okay, lastly, let's do the SPQ. Now, when this came out, again, this has probably been maybe 15 or 20 years. We were told from the CAR attorneys that each of the items, each of the questions that are asked the seller here was a major lawsuit that the CAR attorneys knew about. And so they've made this questionnaire to be more inclusive than just those few questions that are asked of the seller in that state mandated TDS. So as it states up here, it's not, this is not the TDS and not a substitute, but this is a much more thorough explanation of what's going on in this property made by the seller. So obviously you guys know that this is not a form that you fill out. The seller does this. Most importantly, here at the very top of this, where it says note to seller here under Roman numeral 3, it says that the purpose is to tell the buyer about known material or significant items that affect the desirability or the value of the property. So again, it's very subjective. I've had sellers go through this in 30 seconds and they just put no to everything on there. If you personally ever sell a property, you probably want to mark yes and put explanations on most of these items. But this is for the seller to make that opinion as to whether or not this is material or significant in this disclosure. Okay, so this first page, this is a mandated under California under statutes that the seller has to answer these questions. So was there a death within the last 3 years on the property? If it's in an industrial zone, 1 mile within any federal or state ordinance location. By the way, I think there's some areas in Long Beach that are within that area. And also if it's a condominium, if there's a homeowner's set up, so that would be yes under number 7. And then if there's any material or defects on the property on here. One thing that I just missed that was on that original TDS on that second page. Is that, can you flip back to that? On the TDS? I'm sorry, I missed this, and it's an important thing that's on the TDS that a lot of agents are not aware of, especially a lot of veteran agents, is that on the TDS, on that second page, one of the items that's typed in there on page 2 at the bottom, under D, if you can see that, where it says the seller certifies that the property is in compliance with these health and safety codes in regards to smoke detectors and carbon monoxide. So a lot of agents don't realize this, that the seller is stating that the property will be in compliance. So this reflects back on our purchase agreement on the RPA that states that the buyers are purchasing this property as is. But when we have a seller that states that the smoke detectors are in and the water tank, the hot water tank is anchored and strapped according to code, then those are items that the seller has to do, even though the property is being sold as is. And so this is the actual confirmation that the seller is in compliance with these laws. Okay, I'm sorry I missed that. Thought that was important to review that. So let's get back to the SPQ here. So that first page of the SPQ are the statutory declarations that the seller has to make about whether there was a death on the property, any insurance claims within the last 5 years, and basically any overall problem. So all sellers have to complete this. And this is page 1. So on page 2, right? So on page 2 is where we get into the different questions. And it says, hey, seller, are you aware of any modifications or improvements, remodeling that has been done on the property? So take a look at that sentence. Is there any house that you could say no? on that as a seller? I mean, I don't think I've ever been in a house that has, where there hasn't been some remodeling or improvements done,
Or painting.
right? And the next one is, have you ever done any repairs, purpose of water efficiency or renewable energy? We're still up on B there, Danny. Number 2, right? So you'll see that these are very specific questions. Obviously, CAR wants this form out there to, number 1, protect us, the realtors and the brokers, but it also makes a disclosure to the buyers, and it can protect the seller if they answer truthfully on these questions. Number 3, for example, any ongoing or recurring maintenance. So there was a major lawsuit years ago where the buyers came into the property and the sellers never disclosed that every year or every 2 years they have to have their main drain rooted out for roots, right? And a lot of homeowners do that and think nothing of it and will not disclose that because they don't think that that is significant. But if a buyer comes in and says, hey, that's a couple $100 I have to pay every year to get this done, and that was not disclosed, well, that's a possible lawsuit there. So obviously I would disclose all of these items, even if it's pretty minor, just to state and to protect the seller if I'm the seller in this. Yeah, number 4 under B4. Has anything been painted in the last 12 months? So typically that's yes for most properties that are going up for sale. So you just say, hey, the exterior of the house or the back bedroom or something was painted. So make those disclosures on all of these. And I'm going to go through most of these. Defects under C here. And they're saying including past defects that have been repaired. So in other words, however long you've lived at this property, have you ever repaired any electrical or plumbing? Right? Ever? Made any roof repairs, chimney? Any repairs? Windows? Any appliance repairs? So I don't see how most sellers can say no on this, but they do. But anything that's been repaired should be noted in here. Then let's go into water intrusion under E down here. Number 2 is pretty good. It says, hey, have you ever had any mold, mildew, fungus, spores ever on the property? Right? Or any number 1 up above, any moisture related problems? All right, so that's pretty clear. Also in the number 1, have you ever had a leak from any pipe on the property? Yeah, well, I think almost everybody has had a leak at some point, right? And then how about pets? So, my kids growing up, we had hamsters and goldfish. So do you have to disclose that? And the lawsuits that came of this when the attorneys give this seminar, it's typically they've had dogs and there's carpet and there's urine stains that have gone through the carpet and damaged the hardwood floors. So then you've got a buyer coming in, the carpet could be new or it could be in good shape, and they want hardwood floors, and when they take up the carpet, they realize that there's all these stains that they cannot get out of the hardwood floors, and it's going to cost thousands of dollars, and it was never disclosed that there's these stains. So this is where that is noted here and where the seller should make that notation. And whether or not you have to disclose about hamsters or goldfish, I guess is subjective as to whether you think that's material or not. So I would disclose all pets that I was aware of personally. Okay, so next page. Boundaries, anyone that is using your property.
Square footage advisory.
Oh yeah, Zipforms has just come out with a new form on square footage. As many of you know, a lot of times the assessor records will have a different square footage than what the seller states. And you may have an appraisal that was done, or the seller may have an appraisal that was done. That's a report that has to be given to the buyer. And it may show a different square footage also. So in this new Zipforms disclosure on square footage, you list the different statements from these different agencies or from the seller or the appraiser. And so you're basically trying to be transparent and showing that buyer that, hey, everybody has a different opinion as to what that square footage is, and this is what we are aware of. So you can see how that's much better than just saying, oh, the house is 1,000 square feet. Landscaping and pool. Has any of your plants, vegetation, any trees ever had any infestation? Right, well, I know my fruit trees have. So you need to make a note on that. Have you ever had any problems? Number 5 on here. Have you ever had any problems with sprinklers? Made any repairs to the sprinklers of your house? Right? Well, I'm probably out there at least once a month adjusting my sprinklers and making repairs. So again, that comes down to whether or not that seller thinks that, whether they think that that's material or not. Next section, obviously, if you're in an association, you have to disclose that there's an authority that oversees your property, and that they would have to approve of those CC&Rs. If there's any legal claims or any other loans, down below under titleship and ownership liens, you would have to state that. If there's any special assessments under number 6 under J that are on the property tax bill, you would disclose that. I also like the very last one here under the neighborhood noise. In the TDS, I think it just says, is there any neighborhood noise problems or other nuisances, is all that it asks of the seller in the TDS. Well, if you look at this, it says, hey, any neighborhood noise such as traffic, parking, airplanes, trains, light wells, subways, trucks, next page here, freeways, buses, schools, restaurants, entertainment, air compressors, et cetera, et cetera. You know, does a motorcycle gang live next door? Well, all of that stuff obviously needs to be disclosed. So this is really good in that they're being much more specific than just asking is, hey, is there any neighborhood noise? Next, any governmental problems, if the seller is aware of anything that may be condemned in the future, or there's going to be in a historic district, et cetera. Obviously, those all need to be disclosed. And then lastly, under M, under other, and I probably get a call once a month from agents that say, oh, you know, we've had 2 appraisals, or we've had 2 termite reports. Do we have to disclose that second report if we're not using it? Or the sellers, you know, they got an estimate to put new windows in or to put a new roof on last year. Do they have to disclose that report? Well, what's it say here? Under M1, any reports, any inspections, any disclosures in the past, now, or any proposed inspections, everything has to be disclosed. So I don't know of anything that's not that's not disclosed. So if you're asking that question, then the answer is yes, you have to disclose it. Any past smoking on the property. Anything significant that that the seller thinks that would affect the value of the desirability of the property, not otherwise disclosed to the buyer? That's a pretty wide open question there. Again, most of the times the sellers just put no on all of these, but you can see how this is very important for us as realtors, that we ask the seller these questions and that they fill this out truthfully, not only for the disclosure to the buyers, but also for the agents and the brokers' protection. Okay, so then we also have a new, I want to kind of end this. Were you able to pull up that form? Okay, so we've got a new disclosure that becomes effective today. Is today the 1st? Yeah, so this fair housing discrimination advisory is effective as of today, and this form will automatically be attached to any downloads if you're doing a download for a purchase agreement. This will be one of those automatic downloads that you would attach to your RPA. And for our office meeting here next Wednesday of next week, we've got a great presentation on fair housing. I was surprised going through it because fair housing isn't the most exciting topic, but I learned a lot from this. So that's going to be our monthly office meeting next Wednesday at 9 o'clock. We're going to go through a CAR presentation on fair housing. And because of, I should say because of that, but I think just the world that we're in today with a lot of discrimination still present throughout the United States, that CAR is focusing on this right now. And this disclosure is pretty general. You know, read through this at your own leisure here. But the bottom line is everybody needs to sign this on the bottom of page 2. And we'll go into specifics as to changes that are coming in fair housing. And it relates to sexual orientation, into protected classes, animals, emotional support animals, they call them ESAs now. And so we'll delve into that. That's important if you're landlord-tenant, under landlord-tenant laws. And
Number 9 on presenting offers.
Which refusing to negotiate?
Failing to present offers due to credit status.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think most agents know that, but we will go through this and we'll talk about steering. The interesting thing that came up that I didn't know about is steering was actually required by FHA back in the 30s. When FHA was started up, they would not lend to specific areas, and so they steered people to different areas, and they redlined, another common term in our lexicon for real estate agents. They redlined certain areas where FHA would not lend, and so I think that's the basis of redlining. It came from FHA. And as we know today that you can't do any of this, but we'll focus just on the fair housing and discrimination at our Wednesday meeting next week. So I'm done, and I'm hot and I'm sweating. So is there any questions here that I can answer for anybody? Any comments, chats?
Raise your hand if you have any questions.
Okay, guys. Make it a great day, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.